This happened when both me and my friend Jay were 15. I was spending the night at his house, as I often did. It was a normal enough night. We watched movies, played a couple of video games, and stayed up way too late. It must have been about 2 a.m., I think, when we heard a loud banging coming from the front door. Well, luckily at that time we were in his kitchen, at the back of the house, so no one could see us. But we were spooked because there shouldn't have been anyone at the door at this hour, but we figured that it must have been just some sort of a drunk person and they would go away soon enough. After about 30 seconds, there was more banging on the door though, and yelling that neither of us could actually understand. It sounded like an adult man, and he sounded angry, so we were both pretty scared at this point. He texted his mum, who we thought was upstairs, but she said that she had left a bit before without saying anything. She did that often enough. She liked to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night sometimes, so we didn't pay any attention or notice when she left. But at this point, we honestly didn't know what to do, as we were scared to call the police based off of past experiences with cops in our small town being not the best. So we turned off the kitchen light and we sort of ducked down on the ground. We heard the banging and yelling getting louder, and I decided to see who it was, if it was anybody that we knew. I sort of army crawled through the dining room, which was also dark, and peeked through the door to the living room, which is where the front door was. There's also a huge window by the door that you can see right into the dining room through, so I was pretty careful not to be seen. I couldn't really see any details of the man, but he looked to be about 6 feet tall and definitely had grey hair. I crawled back to Jay and we quietly decided what to do next. We heard the knowing stop, so we decided to wait a bit before seeing if it was safe. We also decided to go under the table in the dining room in case he tried to come around the back or something, which is where the kitchen was. After around 10 minutes of silence, we rock, paper, scissored for who had to check if he was there, and of course I lost. So I again army crawled to the dining room door, and I saw the man staring through the window, hands cupped against the glass, and this time I made eye contact with him the moment that he saw me, and I loudly said, "Oh crap," causing my friend to panic and crawl behind me. I saw him pull out his phone, and he told me later that he was texting his mum to come home and save us. The man started yelling again, and this time we could make out a bit more of what he was actually saying. It was mostly cussing, although I definitely heard the phrase, "I'm going to kill you," in there a couple of times at least. I quickly looked past the man to see if any of the neighbours seemed to notice him, but no such luck. I crawled back out of his sight and again discussed what to do with my friend. We decided at this point to go into the basement for safety, which you could get to by moving the fridge. A really confusing house, I know, but it was really old and not meant for modern-sized appliances. But we pull out the fridge and we get into the basement, feeling mostly safe but still pretty terrified. It was at this point too that I actually start having a panic attack, although I'm trying to hold it together as best as I can for Jay, who is also on the verge of a panic attack. When we hear a gunshot and shattering glass from above us. I cover my mouth so I don't scream. Jay and I looked at each other terrified, and we hear loud footsteps and yelling above us, the man asking where we went. We hear him going upstairs and running around up there a bit. He eventually comes back down and starts turning over furniture, I'm assuming to find us. After what felt like hours, but must have been only minutes, Jay's mum pulls into the driveway, which thankfully scares this guy as he runs out the back door in the kitchen. Jay and I get out of the basement and we run to greet his mum, never happier to see her. She was obviously quite shocked by the state of the house, and she hugged us, happy that we were safe and scared by just how close we were to being hurt. We were all pretty scared after that, and we didn't sleep much that night. But after that night, they had much better security installed, and we went over the safety protocol if anything ever happened again. And, luckily for us, it hasn't happened again yet. Although, when I do go over his house from time to time, I'm still pretty scared by it all. In the end, too, we never really called the police, too, because we knew that there wasn't much that they could have done anyway. Just pretty much cleaned up and moved on, which tends to be what they do all the time anyway. So, I saw the rake, or something that I call the rake. I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I know what I saw. I was driving home late at night in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. I was actually driving on a back road with my buddy, taking him home near my house. And it must have been around 12 a.m. when, out of nowhere, this thing just appeared in the headlights in the middle of the road. It was crouching over some sort of roadkill. It was humanoid. It was pale. It looked like it had no ears, but it honestly looked like a Wendigo from Until Dawn. It looked like it was about 7 feet tall, abnormally long arms, no ears, no nose, and some really nasty teeth. It wasn't skinny though, but its skin was tight with ribs visible, and like long claws on the end of its hands too. I was just barely able to dodge it with my truck as I was driving considerably quickly. As I swerved around it, it seemed like time sort of slowed down, and it looked up from the roadkill it was eating and stared at me as I passed by it. Its eyes were yellow, and I immediately brake upon getting past it and yell at my friend, "What the heck was that? Did you see that?" His eyes were wide with fear, and he nods at me. I throw the truck in reverse, but when I approached the roadkill, it was gone. But my friend claims to have seen it too, so I know that I wasn't just seeing things or was crazy or something. When I was a kid, I actually read some stories about the rake at some point, and I know the rake isn't real, so maybe they invented a creature that already existed. Like I said, I have no idea what it was or where it came from. It was only there for half a second, but I know what I saw. If you have any questions about it, then please do ask, because who knows, maybe it'll help me remember something. I've been doing a lot of research too. I really want to find out what this thing was. In fact, I've kind of been obsessed with it. I need answers, and I won't stop looking. So today I was doing my regular shopping with my children, my 3-year-old and my 6-month-old. While shopping, my 3-year-old got a little wooden doll. It's a kind of old school style wooden block person. I haven't been able to get a photo as she won't put it down. But she started calling it Daniel. But that was no big deal to me. And we ordered Uber Eats for dinner that night, and then as I looked at the status, it says, "Your driver's name is Daniel." I sort of just brushed that off as a coincidence. I put a YouTube video on while I ate, and it was just a short story. The first sentence, though, of the story was, "I don't want to go to Daniel's house." And that was when things started feeling a little bit weird. She wanted to put this doll in the bathroom sink while she showered, and I told her no and to put it in her room. I showered her, and then she got dressed and instantly grabbed this doll again. I put her to bed, not noticing at all that she still had it. And a couple of minutes later, she starts yelling. I went in to ask her what was wrong and noticed that she was still holding this doll. I asked her who she was talking to, and she said Daniel. I asked her what they were talking about, and she said that Daniel was scared. I asked her why he was scared, and she said because his family went into the water. Now, she has never done anything like this before, and I feel like I'm being watched too all the time since moving into this house just over a year ago. I've had it in the past, so I've never really thought much about it until now. But the last few nights, I've felt like I'm going to see someone on my back deck when I go out to make my 6-month-old a bottle during the night. Obviously, there's nobody there, but a few nights ago, I could have swore that I saw someone duck down inside my 3-year-old's playhouse out in the yard. There wasn't anybody there, as the window I had saw it through was that low that I could see her head even when she's sitting inside of it, so I could confirm that there was actually nobody there, but I could have sworn that I saw someone. I have no idea what's going on, but any advice would help. It could all be coincidence, I know, but I could use a second opinion. Also, I should probably mention that we just got home from swimming lessons not too long ago, and usually she refuses to do anything without the teacher holding her, but today she just dove straight off the edge and swam on her own. Even the teacher was surprised with her sudden confidence, and again, this could just be nothing, but I thought that it would be worth mentioning it since she said that his family went into the water. And also, for about 10 minutes this afternoon, she was just running around the backyard screaming Daniel, as if he was a lost animal or something. I have no idea why she's doing it, as she had the doll in her hand the whole time, but man, whatever's going on, I just don't get it. So my best friend has been staying at my house for 2 days. He left for work at 6 a.m. this morning. He doesn't have any keys to get in the house, and he messages me this, but I don't reply because I'm at work. He texts me around 3:30 asking if I'm home. I tell him that I'm not. I won't be until around 6 p.m. I get home and he's in the house somehow. I ask him how he got in, and he tells me that I let him in. But obviously the door was locked and he has no keys, so there's no way that he got in any other way. He told me that he came to the house and tried the door before texting, and it was locked. He then leaves and comes back, and when he approaches the door, he said that it sounded like someone was coming down the stairs, so he knocked again, and seconds later, I opened the door for him, say what's up, and run up the stairs. So he stays downstairs, and then 2 hours later, I came back home with my brother from work. Nothing is missing, and nobody was in the house, and if somebody was and they left, they'd have to go downstairs. But my friend was down there, and they said that they didn't see anything. But what's really weird to me, though, is that I jog up the stairs when I go up. I also always shake his hand when I greet him, but he said that I just ran upstairs. The only thing that I've had happen here that was odd was I was downstairs in the mirror, and I thought that I saw something run past me. In the moment, and sometime later, it still didn't even seem odd to me. I thought that I was just hallucinating or seeing something, but now it just creeps me out. I'm not really much of a believer in the paranormal, but I can't disprove it either. I don't think that he would lie, but even if he was, he still had to get in the house somehow. Also, I've been talking to him more to get details about the story, and this is what I got. I have both nostrils pierced, but 2 days ago it fell out at my girlfriend's house, so I only have my ring. He said that he saw both of them in my nose, and I had no facial expression. He also can't really recall what I was wearing because he says that it was a bit of a blur. And after basically interrogating him for like 2 hours, he stuck to the story, but he did add new details every time that he told me. So I'm leaning maybe to that he broke in and didn't want to tell me, but he's saying that he wouldn't lie about this. I'm really not trying to buy the whole ghost story because it just sounds ridiculous. I still didn't find any way that he could have gotten in the house too, because I checked everything and found nothing opened or out of place. It's really frustrating though, because now I'm uncomfortable leaving and coming home knowing that something let him in the house, or that he broke in, and both are equally disturbing.
Life can be weird sometimes, taking you places you never thought you would go and connecting you with people you never thought you would see again. Several months ago, I moved to a new town that is about an hour away from the town I grew up in. I moved into a beautiful home that rested within a quiet suburban community, the opposite of the neighborhood I grew up in. The most peculiar and, quite frankly, the most amazing thing about my new home was the fact that I knew my neighbor. It was my old childhood friend, Artie. If I had made a list of people I was sure that I would never see again, Artie would be top of that list. Growing up, we kids in the neighborhood always get together and played sports, played tag, rode bikes, and basically just acted like degenerate youths. Of all the kids in my neighborhood, Artie was one of my best friends. When we were kids, video games were just starting to get popular, not like they are today. Artie and I were the only two that loved video games and spent more time than anybody else sitting inside and playing them. We'd still play outside with everybody else, but we were more invested in our video games. I even remember specifically many times when Artie would stay overnight and we'd play games all night long. Sadly, when I was in 5th grade, Artie and his family moved away. We called each other a few times, but we lost touch and never reconnected. When MySpace first came out, we became friends on that platform, but he was living his own life somewhere else, and it just seemed like we had nothing in common anymore. By the time Facebook came around, I had all but forgotten about Artie and never even thought to look him up. Artie was no more than a distant memory, and that was until I moved into my new home, and I was beyond shocked to find out that my neighbor was actually him. At first, it was amazing to see my old friend. We connected right away, and I was in shock that he lived back on this side of the United States. When we were kids, they moved to the East Coast. It was just very surprising that he now lived so close to where we grew up. I asked him what brought him back to this part of the country, and he simply just said that he liked the West Coast more. After I got moved in, I invited Artie over for a couple of beers to catch up. When he showed up that night, he came with 2 of his friends, a man named Scott and Scott's girlfriend. Her name was Jane. I thought it was a little rude that Artie showed up with people without asking me first. I didn't care and would have been okay with it, it's just really the principle of the matter. The 3 of them started acting weird as soon as they were inside. Scott and Jane were fascinated with all my stuff in my living room. Their eyes were zooming around my house, and they looked like they weren't even on the same planet as me. It was like they were taking a mental inventory of everything in my home. Every few minutes, I would notice Scott and Jane whispering to each other. Call me crazy if you will, but I had a bad feeling brewing in my stomach. Eventually, I brought up video games to Artie. I asked if he still played any games. He looked disgusted, and then laughed to himself. In an arrogant and condescending voice, he said, "No way, man. I stopped playing video games when I was like 12. That stuff's for kids." I laughed out of habit and tried to mirror his attitude. I leaned back in my chair and said, "Oh man, I must have missed the memo when I was 12. Not only do I still play, but I actually work on games for a living." Everyone in the room shared a small laugh. It was a burst of awkward laughter, if I'm being honest. I will say, though, after sharing that bit of news, the mood in the room changed quite a bit. They all seemed very interested in what I had to say, and specifically what I did. Scott was asking very specific questions, like if the computer that I had in the room was the computer I used for work, and it was. I worked at a studio as my main source of income, but I spent a lot of my time working on my home computer, and I'm working on my own indie game on my machine in the spare time. I shared all those details and much more with Artie, Scott, and Jane. We continued to hang out for a little while longer, and then we called it a night. The next day I saw Artie outside, and I waved to him while I was heading to my car to run some errands. He waved, but he looked frustrated about something. That night I stayed in and worked on my game all night. A little after 2 a.m. I got an alert on my phone that someone was at my door. I had a motion camera that was on the side of my front door, as well as a Ring camera on the doorbell. I pulled up the video and I couldn't believe my eyes. There were 3 people on my front steps. All 3 were wearing masks and had hoods on. These were the masks that you would wear to the doctors, not like Halloween masks. They looked like they were deliberating about something. 2 of them were standing in the background, and one of them was directly in front of the door. The one in front of the door turned around completely, so his back was facing the camera now. He was concealing something in the back of his waistband. He grabbed the handle of it and then let it go, and from that little action, I was able to tell exactly what he was concealing. Finally, he turned back once again and grabbed the doorknob. He turned the doorknob a few times, testing to see if it was locked, and thank God it was. He took a step back as if he were deciding his next move, and that's when one potential intruder noticed the Ring camera. The person in the back yelled, "Wait," and they pointed to the camera. It was a woman's voice that yelled, "Wait." The intruder in front bent over and stared directly into the camera. Even with the mask on, it was obvious. The intruder directly in front of my camera was Artie, which led me to believe the other 2 were his friends, Scott and Jane, that I met earlier. His eyes got wide as if he knew that he was caught. Scott and Jane turned and ran in the opposite direction of Artie's house. Artie took a few steps back, then came back to the door and shook the handle aggressively, trying one last time to get inside. He said something under his breath that I couldn't understand, and then he also ran. I called the police, gave them the footage, and reported every detail to them. Artie didn't come home for days, probably because he knew that he was going to get caught. After a couple of days, I finally saw him sneaking into his own house. I called the police, who showed up quickly. It turns out, after I reported Artie to the police, they were able to connect the dots to an entire string of home invasions. The nail in the coffin for Artie and his accomplices was the fact that another house they robbed weeks ago also had a Ring camera, and they weren't wearing masks for that little outing. It was sad to see an old friend fall so far. Someone I had so many fond memories of turned and went down a completely dark path. Thankfully, that motion camera and Ring camera saved my life. Never assume that you're immune from robbery or worse based on where you live. I live in a very safe neighborhood with almost zero crime, and if it were not for my cameras, I may not be sharing this story today. The hardest part of moving to a town for people like me is making friends. Making friends in general is something I struggle with. Unfortunately, I am a bit on the awkward side, and I'm not afraid to admit that. When my job forced me to move hundreds of miles from my hometown, I was sad, but I couldn't pass up the chance. The work I do is important, and it pays very well. My logic was that I would move away, make some money, and then move back to my hometown in a couple of years when my contract was completed. The first month in my new town was tough. After work, I sort of just went home and played video games and watched everything I could, but it was only a matter of time until loneliness crept its ugly head around. I eventually discovered a comic book store that was only about 5 minutes away from my new house. One thing about me is that I love comics. I've been reading Marvel comics since I was old enough to read, and in fact, probably even longer than that. I used to be obsessed with the illustrations in comics before I could even read, and I remember grabbing my brother's comics and just staring at the covers before I could even understand what the words even said. Finding this bookstore wouldn't cure my loneliness, but the comfort of comics would be a nice distraction for me. I started going a couple of times a week and got hooked once again on all my favorite comics. One day, while I was perusing the new comic book section, I grabbed the latest Fantastic Four comic, and right at that moment, I was approached by an interesting-looking man. He was tall and very skinny. He had these thick black glasses and shoulder-length blonde hair. He had a beard, but it wasn't a good one. It was all patchy and all over the place. I moved out of the way thinking that he wanted to get into that section, but instead he wanted to talk to me. In this thick southern accent, he said, "Hey man, you a fan of the Fantastic Four?" I smiled and nodded. I'm not the greatest with random interactions like that. "Dude, you're gonna love it. He really knows how to write the F4. Name's Pete, by the way. Not Peter Parker, though." Then he laughed, as I did too. If anybody doesn't know, Peter Parker is the real name of the man underneath the Spider-Man mask. I looked at Pete and extended my hand and said, "Nice to meet you, Pete." Then I gave him my name. From that strange and very awkward interaction, Pete and I became friends. We hung out several times a week and just talked about comics, Star Wars, video games, and basically anything nerdy that I was interested in. It was like this guy was created in a lab specifically to be my friend. For months this continued, and I was happy with my new friend. One day, when we were leaving the comic book shop, Pete said, "You know, I was thinking it was a sign, you moving here and stuff, walking into that shop that day. It's like you're me, but from the multiverse." Which is another comic book reference that Pete pulled out of nowhere. I just laughed and went along with it, and I did that a lot with Pete. Not too much longer after that comment, I noticed that Pete was wearing the same clothes as me. I would wear my Fantastic Four shirt once a week at least, and before I knew it, so did Pete. I would wear a Darth Vader shirt, and then the next day, Pete would have the same one. I'm not saying people can't have the same shirts, it just seemed awfully strange that out of nowhere, he had the same shirts as me. Right around this time, he cuts his hair and shaves his beard, and if you're keeping track at home, I have short hair and I'm clean shaven. When we hung out the day he got his hair cut, he said, "Now we definitely look like we could be the same person. Do you think maybe we actually are? Like, maybe we really are from the multiverse or something?" It didn't seem like one of Pete's comic book references anymore. This seemed weird and just off for some reason. I just dismissed his comment and started talking about food or something. It made me uncomfortable and I just kind of wanted to redirect the conversation. That night I couldn't help but think about it. I may not be articulating it well, but everything about the latest comment was just off. His mannerisms, the way he looked, the way he talked, everything was just different. I thought about texting him that night and telling him that I felt uncomfortable, but I decided that I'm being paranoid and I left it alone. The next day I was getting ready to leave for work, and when I opened the door, I could have sworn that I saw Pete's car, but as I said, I was being paranoid and just ignored my feelings. Pete had texted me to make sure that we were still on for the comic book store after work, and I told him yeah, even though I didn't want to. I worked for a few hours, but I had myself all worked up for some reason. I asked my supervisor if I could leave early because I wasn't feeling well, and she let me go just several hours into my shift. When I got home, the first thing I noticed was that the front door inside the screen door was open. I could never leave that door open. I have thousands of dollars worth of collectibles, comic books, and Funko Pops, and I approached the door slowly and I entered quietly. I could hear movement coming from my office, which is where all those valuables I just mentioned are located. I snuck to the side door and peered inside the room, and in the closet, rummaging through boxes, was Pete. I barged in the room and said, "Pete? What are you doing?" He jumped and started to stutter a little bit. I was just trying to see if you had a certain comic, man. I was going to surprise you." I looked around the room. All the drawers in my desk were open and my computer was open. My social security card was in that desk. To the right of Pete was a box, and inside the box was a handful of my rarest comics, some of them being worth well over $5,000, and some personal financial documents were in the box. "Listen, man, He paused and started to look around the room. What I had just noticed, though, is he wasn't talking with that accent anymore. Before I could process my next thought, Pete grabbed the lamp that was on my desk, ripped it from the wall, and threw it at me as hard as he could. It hit me on the head, and when I bent over in pain, he punched me in the face as hard as he could and I dropped to the ground. I was dizzy and everything was foggy as I tried to get to my feet. I heard his car start and peel away. When I regained my focus, I noticed that he took that box of comics and documents. I called the police right away and gave them Pete's information, and that's when I realized Pete wasn't a friend at all. I never got his last name, mainly because I just never really thought about it or cared. I don't have social media, so I never even bothered to ask for his. We texted, but I didn't realize his phone was just some cheap track phone. The cops informed me that Pete most likely wasn't his name. Inside the box were a couple of credit cards that I owned as well, as I didn't bring them with me to work or anything like that. He used one to get gas, but that was the only time it was used before I was able to cancel it. The cops informed me that whoever Pete really was, he knew somehow that I had money. He got to know me and used our friendship to basically steal everything I had. Thankfully, he didn't get much from me, but he did get those comics that are worth in the thousands, and they do mean more to me sentimentally than the money. To this day, I have no idea who Pete was and where my comics ever went. I was able to get one of my comics back only a week after this incident happened, though. He had sold it to some pawn shop, and the guy wasn't very nice about the entire situation. What was most horrific about this situation was that he told the pawn shop employee that his name was my name, and the pawn shop employee had to double take because he thought it was me when I went into the shop to try and actually look for the comic. Some people out there are truly scary and have very insidious intentions. It's scary to think about the people you consider close in your life and what they may think about you. apologize in advance for how I may sound writing this, as I have yet to try and put this into text. I'm looking for just general advice, I suppose. First, I must preface this by saying I currently live with my girlfriend, and I do love her. However, I fear that my girlfriend is not the same woman anymore. We've been together for nearly 10 years, and we started dating in our senior year of high school and have been together ever since. We both went away to separate colleges and stayed together that entire time. After graduating, we moved in together and have been happy until recently. I know what most people will assume because I have brought my concerns to friends who all say the same thing or versions of the same things. Most say things like, she's probably with somebody else, she's doing drugs, or my personal favorite, she just doesn't love you anymore, man. If it were any of those, at least I would have clarification, but I assure you it's not. She's different now, like she's hiding something, but not someone else. It's almost as if though she's hiding something much darker, and I'll start at the beginning to try to remember as much as possible. Recently, I got home from work earlier than usual. Coming home early is not something that's rare for me, as my job has somewhat irregular hours. When I got home, she was in the shower. She didn't hear me come inside, but I heard her as soon as I got close to the bathroom. She was grunting and sounded angry. She kept yelling a series of curse words and continued to sound angry and upset about something. I knocked on the door to ask if she was all right, and the cursing stopped right away. She took a moment to respond and then said everything was okay. When she got out of the shower, which took a very long time, I may add, she looked anxious and extremely tense. I asked one more time if she was okay, and sounding annoyed, she said yes and told me not to ask again. I backed off, figuring she just needed space for something. She's not the type of person to jump down anyone's throat. She's never short with me or anyone else, and after knowing her for almost 20 years and dating for almost 10, I can say with certainty that this was not her at all. The next morning I woke up for work and showered. When I got into the shower, I noticed that there was something on the ledge where we kept the soap bottles. It kind of looked like dried blood. I picked up the bottle and there was a red ring that formed under the bottle. I started to look at it a little closer and I noticed dried residue in several of the nooks and crannies around the shower area. I was curious, but not tense or worried or anything like that. That afternoon when I got home, one of her newer friends was over at the house. Kind of a strange woman named Shauna. I'll be honest, I don't like Shauna. I don't know exactly where they met. Maybe she was a coworker, maybe she was one of my girlfriend's customers. I don't know. All I know is that she just rubbed me the wrong way. She would talk constantly about getting into trouble when she was younger, and all the wild stuff she did when she was in her 20s. Shauna was most likely in her mid to late 30s if I had to guess. So that afternoon when I walked inside, my girlfriend and Shauna were acting weird. I noticed the laptop on the kitchen table, and when I got inside, they shut the laptop and seemed like they were trying to get me to leave the kitchen. I know something was wrong. I could see it on my girlfriend's face, but I didn't dare ask again. I went into the bedroom and shut the door so I could change from my work clothes. I could hear Shauna whispering something to my girlfriend and she sounded tense. Next thing I know, I heard a door slam, and when I went back out there, Shauna was pulling out of my driveway. My girlfriend is normally outgoing and bubbly as can be, but now she seemed more like a zombie or someone who hasn't slept in days. It became clear to me that she was hiding something. I truly didn't think that she was with someone else. It's not in her character. Ordinarily, I wouldn't snoop. We don't have that kind of relationship. But when I opened the laptop, her last page was still open. She was looking at weapons to purchase, and the website was not something I recognized. It looked shady as could be. Something to note about her, she's very anti-gun and anti-weapon in general, so to be on a page like this is extremely out of character. And this was what prompted me to look at the last few pages in the search history, and it was strange, to say the least. There were several news articles about people who were missing, and 2 web pages with directions to what appeared to be in the middle of nowhere. As the days passed, I noticed that she became more and more of a husk of her former self. No laughing, no smiles, no intimacy, no semblance of my girlfriend. I started to notice weird things like her shoes were extremely muddy, her phone was almost always turned off, and her computer mysteriously broke the day after I searched the history. I saw Shauna one more time a few days ago when I got home from work. Her car was outside running and it looked full of luggage. I walked inside and Shauna looked angry. She looked at me, then back at my girlfriend. She sighed, walked out of the house, and peeled off in her car. When she left, my girlfriend was as white as a ghost and sat on the couch, and I asked one last time if she was okay, and she said, "I will be soon. Shauna just... Well, it doesn't matter. I will be soon. I promise." I tried to unpack that statement a million times, and I still am not 100% sure what she meant. It is now a few days removed from when Shauna left, and my girlfriend is still not herself. My girlfriend is taking personal time off, so she hasn't left the house in days. My first thought was that maybe Shauna and her had something romantic together, but when I asked her about it, she denied it fiercely. After a couple of battles, she told me to leave it alone and stop asking. And the eyes that looked at me, I just barely recognized them anymore. I don't know what's happening, but my girlfriend, my best friend, is lost somewhere in her mind, and not the same woman I have loved for so long. If anybody reading this could please just give me some of your thoughts. I've done everything I can think of, and I'm worried that she may have done something horrible. If this story progresses anymore or I have any more news, I'll try to update you over email, let's read, and as of right now, I'm grasping at straws and praying that my girlfriend bounces back soon and that my worst thoughts are nothing more than dark fantasies plaguing my mind. I spent the early parts of my life on the wrong side of the law. I never finished school since I dropped out of high school in 11th grade, a decision that I always regretted. When I was 20 years old, I was arrested for the first time, and unfortunately, it would not be the last. During my entire 20s, I was in and out of jail. On my 30th birthday, I decided to make a change in my life. I realized that I had no friends and no direction. I tried different churches and clubs in my community to see if I could find my calling in life. During my search for meaning, I found Barry. He was exactly what I needed in life, especially at this point. I had met Barry at some church event. Barry said that he identified as agnostic, which I found strange being that it was a church event. But he said that he came to all the church events because of the community aspect. He claimed that all the people were outrageously friendly and there was no other place in the world to get this loving camaraderie. He was right about that. The people were so friendly at this place. I'm not good at religion, so I'm not even sure what kind of church this was. All I know is that the people were fantastic. Everybody loved Barry, even the church officials. Nobody cared about his stance on faith, they just loved him anyways. Barry was great to these people. He was constantly helping in any way he could, and he would donate clothes, food, and most importantly, his time. I'm not sure how Barry made his money, but he had a lot of it and used it for good. He would constantly give to the poor and encourage everyone to come to the events at the church. He would serve food to the less fortunate on the front lines. He would drive to very low-income areas of the city and help in any way that he could. Barry was, by all accounts, an amazing human being. In my search for meaning, obviously, I gravitated right to Barry. With no judgment in his character, Barry took me under his wing, and I kind of became his partner. I helped with everything that Barry did in the community. It seemed like being with him almost cleared my name. Nobody cared who I was in the past, they only cared about me in the present. This life continued for a couple of years for me. Barry became more than a partner and, in fact, became an actual friend. When I had nowhere to live, Barry let me move into a small guest house. We'd wake up early, start our day, and just make our rounds in the city doing whatever we could, and Barry funded everything. This guy seemed to have an endless supply of money, and I never questioned it. One afternoon, when we were doing some charity event, I noticed for the first time that Barry wasn't himself. This guy was always energetic and excited about life, but he seemed quiet, almost like he was on another planet. That night, we were heading back to his house, and I asked if he was all right, and all he did was take a deep breath, sigh, and just said he was fine. Clearly, something was wrong. That night, I looked out the windows of the guest house that sat just behind Barry's house. His lights were on, and the blinds were open, so I could clearly see inside of his house. The guest house sat probably 50 feet or so from the house, so even though I could clearly see in the house, I was still far enough away that I couldn't tell if he was okay. Maybe I just had a bad feeling, but I think my life of crime just gave me insight into when people are just going to break. I hit my breaking point a lot in life. It's what got me in trouble most of the time, and it just seemed like Barry was at that point today. I thought about it for a while, but I eventually decided to go check on him just to make sure that he was okay. The guy gave me so much, and I figured I at least owed him this. I made my way through the yard that separated the guest house and his house. When I got close to the house, I could hear yelling. It was Barry, and he was screaming. I started to sneak toward the house now to eavesdrop, I admit that. I got close enough to be able to hear him clearly. He must have been on the phone because I could only hear him and not anybody else. He sounded so rageful and angry, and I never heard him raise his voice before, and now he was screaming, swearing, saying things I still can't believe came out of his mouth. I sneaked to the side of the house so I could peer into one of the windows. I saw Barry, frantically pacing around the house, and he was indeed on the phone. I heard him clearly say, "I don't care. If you don't get this done, I'll find someone else who can. I don't deal with this crap day in and day out for no reason. Get this done immediately so I can finally get out of this hell." That's exactly what he said. Obviously, I have no idea what he meant by all of that in the moment. He hung up the phone and threw it at the wall as he continued to scream. With no notice, he turned and saw me looking through the window. I dove out of the way, but I was sure he saw me. I laid on the side of his house and hoped that I didn't hear the door open. The hope only lasted a moment because the front door whipped open and I heard Barry screaming my name. I rose to my feet, embarrassed that I got caught snooping. Part of me figured that he would be okay because he was always so calm and patient with me, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The large middle-aged man grabbed the collar of my flannel and pushed me against the house. He started screaming so loud into my face I could feel the spit hitting my cheek. "After everything I did for you, I find you out here spying on my personal business." I was quiet. I didn't know what to say to him. I wanted to tell him that I was only over there to make sure he was all right, but I couldn't get the words out. He threw me to the ground and again shouted at me saying, "It was you, wasn't it? You're the one trying to get my money." I started to defend myself, claiming that I had no idea what he was talking about, which was true. When I started to get to my feet, he pushed me down again and kicked me in the face and yelled, "Stay here." Then he stormed back inside, slamming the door on his way in. The kick rocked me. I was dazed and saw stars in front of my eyes for a moment. I regained my focus and got to my feet again. I looked in the window and he was rummaging through a chest that he had in the room. He seemed to be grabbing something, but I wasn't sure what it was, but it sounded heavy. I ran back to the guest house, not wanting to take any chances. I grabbed a couple of personal items and ran into the woods that lined his property. I hid in the tree line and saw Barry wandering around the guest house and then eventually breaking down the door. He continued screaming my name and shouting for me to stop hiding, and he was indeed carrying something, but like before, I couldn't exactly tell what it was. It was long and narrow, and he was using it to knock back the doors. Finally, he reached the tree line. I was quietly making my way down the wooded area. Thankfully, he was shouting, so he couldn't hear me shuffling through the trees. I eventually made it to the road and ran as fast as I could as far as I could. I'd look back every few minutes but never saw him following me. When I got to a local convenience store, I asked if the store could please call the police for me as I didn't have a cell phone at the time. When they showed up, I told them everything. I didn't really know if there was anything they could do, but I figured since Barry technically attacked me and then chased me, I did feel as if though I was in danger. The police showed up at his house, and the next thing I knew, he was arrested. I don't know what he was arrested for, as I was never informed for some reason, but when I googled his name, nothing comes up, which leads me to believe that Barry was actually a fake name. I spent years with this guy and even lived just a few yards from his house, and he never once led me to believe that he was hiding anything or even had a violent bone in his body. Whatever secret he had, it finally collapsed on him. I have no idea if he intended on harming me more that evening, but The beating I received outside his house convinced me otherwise. Does anybody out there have any idea what Barry could have been doing or what he could have been hiding? I just want answers. Sometimes it's the best people that are hiding the darkest secrets. Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content. It's funny how in life some friends can come and go. What's not so funny is the way some of the friends go. A couple of years ago, my best friend Dee decided to have her bachelorette party in Nashville, Tennessee. The prospect of spending an entire weekend in Nashville was exciting, to say the least. The group of us contained 7 girls, and that included the soon-to-be bride. We all pitched in and rented an awesome house for the long weekend that was just a several-minute trip to where all the happening nightlife takes place. A trip to Nashville isn't just an hour down the road for us, so it required some planning to make it a reality for Dee. As a result of the months-long planning process, I ended up getting much closer to some of the girls that were going to be at the wedding. One of the girls could be described as outgoing, if I'm being nice, but more realistically, she was abrasive and in your face. Truth be told, I ended up becoming really close to her during this time. Her name was Megan, and it started off just meeting for drinks and planning the trip. That soon evolved into real plans of hanging out and talking about more than just Dee's wedding. Megan was a wild spirit. We'd go out drinking, and she was the girl who would try and get on top of the bar and dance. She almost always left with a guy or a girl, and was always ready to go back out the next day. For a while, I admired her spirit and just the overall tenacious attitude in life. I was looking forward to partying with her in Nashville. It was surely going to be a treat, and oh boy, was I wrong. By the time the Nashville trip came, I was already becoming wary of Megan, as horrible as that may sound. Someone I considered an acquaintance and then a good friend, I was starting to have second thoughts about her. When we were in Nashville, I hated to admit that my gut was right. Megan was off the wall, and not in a good way. She got up on the bar and tried to dance again, just as she's done many times in our hometown, but she fell off the bar and cracked her head open. She was all right, didn't seem to be hurt, but it was embarrassing, and we were asked to leave the bar. She tried to fight several of the other bridesmaids, as well as patrons of the many bars we went to. Dee was so embarrassed, and she wanted to go back to the house that we were renting and stay in so we wouldn't get in any more trouble. Megan was not a fan of that idea, stating over and over again that we were in Nashville to party. If we wanted to have a house party, we should have just stayed home. Being the maid of honor, I tried to tell Megan that it was about whatever Dee wanted and not us. Well, Megan didn't seem to care. She basically told us that we were lame and that she was going to stay and party at the bar. Dee was furious and told us to leave her there and that we were going back to the house. I told Megan to call me when she needed a ride, and I would make sure that she got back to the house one way or another. She was a bit dismissive, but nodded and then went back to the bar. We drank and played Wii Sports at the house that we rented. Believe it or not, this was one of the highlights of the trip for me. It was relaxing and fun, and we all just had a good time. I'd forgotten all about Megan until about 4 a.m. I got out of bed and checked my phone. I had one message from Megan at 2:30 in the morning. It was a picture message of her giving the finger to the camera with a group of 3 girls and one guy all giving the camera the same gesture. Though that may seem alarming to some who may read this, I assure you this is a typical Megan message. I called her, and the call went right to voicemail. I texted several more times and got no response. I walked around the entire house to make sure that she wasn't sleeping in any of the rooms, and to my horror, she was not. I didn't know what to do, honestly. At around 6 in the morning, I woke up some of the girls and asked them what they think we should do. Because Megan was horrible to some of the girls earlier in the night, the girls basically said to just leave her and good riddance. Though a part of me may have felt that we couldn't leave her. After all, something could have happened to her, and at the end of the day, she is still one of Dee's friends. When Dee finally woke up, there was still no sign of Megan. Dee is a bit of an anxious human, so she became erratic right away. Our flight was later on that afternoon, and we needed to get ready to head to the airport. We finally decided after a long back and forth that the best course of action would be to call the police and figure out what to do. Right before calling the authorities, Megan finally called us. She sounded messed up, like maybe she was drunk or something. She yelled at all of us, telling us that we were horrible friends and we deserved to rot in hell. She specifically singled me out, which I still don't understand to this day. We begged and pleaded with her to get back to the airport because we needed to leave, and she basically told us to screw off and that she could get home just fine without us. After dropping several expletives, her final word to us in verbatim was, "Just leave me in Nashville. Bye." Dee tried the entire afternoon to get Megan to the airport, but no response. She turned off her location and just blocked us all, and we had no idea where to find her. We boarded the plane and just left Megan in Nashville. Days passed, and I went about my life without thinking about Megan. I eventually spoke to Dee several times about it, and she told me that she hadn't heard from Megan either. She had no family here, so we really didn't know how to get in touch with anyone to make sure that she was all right. We looked her up online, found nothing. We even went as far as to look at missing people and even deaths, but thankfully nothing. We decided that wherever Megan is, whatever she's doing, she doesn't want to be found, and hopefully she's safe. And that was several years ago. But just last week, though, I had my first encounter with Megan, and it didn't go well. On Friday after work, I get home and decided to stay in for the evening. It had been a long week, and I was ready to just lay low and drink a glass of wine. My boyfriend was out of town for business, and I was going to be alone. Shortly after midnight, I decided to get ready for bed. I called my boyfriend to say goodnight. I decided to FaceTime him while I was brushing my teeth and getting ready for bed. I had my phone propped up on top of a little cabinet that I had in my bathroom. From where the phone was propped up, he could see out the doorway and into my bedroom. My boyfriend was in mid-sentence telling me a story when he just stopped. I asked if he was okay, and he said, "Is someone else there?" I laughed and grabbed the phone. I asked what he was talking about, and he said that in the background he saw the closet door open slightly. I was freaked out, but for sure thought that he was messing with me. I looked back down at the phone, and he was visibly shaken, which isn't like him. He texted me while we were on FaceTime and told me to get out of the apartment now, claiming that he could absolutely see someone moving in the closet. I tried not to be obvious and make my way to the kitchen. While I was putting my shoes on, I looked at the doorway to my bedroom, and standing in the doorway was none other than Megan. She looked insane and ready to attack. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, and she stared back at me, and in an almost sinister voice she said, "You left me in Nashville." I put my hands up to reason with her. At the same time, my boyfriend was still on the phone, and he had his roommate in the hotel room call the authorities to send someone to my house. Before I could say any words, Megan said it again, and this time with more ferocity in her voice. "You left me in Nashville." Flight mode kicked in, and I decided to run as fast as I could out the door. Megan chased after me as she continued to yell that same phrase repeatedly. I was sprinting, and Megan was close behind, not at all letting up her chase. Before long, I could see the lights of a cop car. I flagged them down in desperation, and it was as if Megan didn't care. The cop got out of the car, and Megan tackled me in front of the police officer. The cop apprehended her immediately, and she became frantic, screaming and making noises I still can't even understand. They arrested Megan, who was carrying a knife concealed inside of her sweatshirt. What she intended on doing with that knife, I still don't know. This is all so fresh, and I don't really know what I'm doing. I've hired a lawyer, and I'm trying to figure out what even happened. It seems like Megan is some shell of herself, as if the real Megan isn't even in there anymore. I've never had a friend that has come into my life so fast and left even faster. I reflect on everything that happened in Nashville and how we all reacted, and I'm sure leaving her that night had much to do with the eventual collapse of her sanity. I blame myself for what happened, even though many have told me not to. I hope she recovers someday, and anybody who can offer any guidance on my situation as to how I should handle this is greatly appreciated. Just be kind to everyone, because you never know who might be hurting on the inside. I'm sure most people who read this can understand what I'm saying when I say, I wish I would have listened to the warnings about a certain romantic partner. We have all had horrible exes, I'm sure, but mine could have ended my life permanently. When I first met Wyatt, everything was like a dream. He seemed like the guy who presented his life as an open book. He was charming and witty, and he was wildly handsome. Tall, had an athletic build, the right amount of scruff, and had the most beautiful white teeth that he always presented when he smiled. I know we all have different things that attract us, but he was objectively speaking very handsome. Whenever people met Wyatt, they instantly fell in love with the guy. He just had one of those extremely likable personalities where he could get along with really anybody. Wyatt and I went out on a few dates, but nothing flourished right away. Everything that I just mentioned, I loved about the guy, but I just didn't feel a special connection. We talked about it and Wyatt understood, and there were no hard feelings. We stayed friends and went our separate ways when it came to dating. We started to get really close as friends over the next few months. We would tell each other about our love life, or lack thereof in my case, and offer advice. He became someone in my life that I treasured. His friendship was more important to me than any of my other friends at this point in my life. A couple of years passed, and Wyatt eventually started seeing this girl and then deleted all of his social media, and he mostly stopped talking to me. I didn't take it too personally because by this point, he and I didn't really talk nearly as much. Shortly after that, I stopped seeing Wyatt around. Even though he and I drifted apart a little bit, we would still see each other out at the bars, but lately no Wyatt. The number I had for him was no longer in service, and he still never had any social media. One night, a group of people at the bar started to talk about Wyatt. I was informed by these people that his breakup with the girl that he was seeing went horrible, and he ended up moving away to restart his life. I felt bad for the guy and honestly felt a little upset that he didn't talk to me about any of this. I know we had somewhat drifted apart, but I would have been there for him in a second if he had called. Life went on after this night, and I soon forgot about Wyatt until one night not so long ago. It was a Friday night, and I was at the local bar my friends and I always visit. It was like a scene out of a movie. Suddenly, the doors opened, and just as handsome as ever, Wyatt walked in. I stepped away from the group of people that I was with in mid-conversation and greeted him with the biggest hug ever. We talked all night about everything. It was like being with the old Wyatt before we drifted away. The one thing I noticed in hindsight was that he never got up to order a drink from the bar. I didn't notice it then, and I wish I had. That night he came over to my place, and for the first time in all the years I had known Wyatt, we kissed. That kiss eventually led to more dates, which led to me giving him a chance outside of the friend zone. I was recently single again and emotional, and I think he just had come back to town at the right time. Part of me felt like this was the right choice to give him a chance, but something deep down still told me to trust my initial gut about this guy. When we finally started dating, I noticed that he never wanted to go to the bar we always went to. I thought it was a weird request, but nothing to be sketched out about. Some people just don't like certain bars or restaurants. So for about a month, we never went to that bar. One night, my friends all begged for me to meet them at our usual bar, and I told Wyatt I wanted to go. He seemed nervous for some reason, but ultimately just said whatever. He said he didn't want to go, which was totally fine with me. I'm not one of those people to have to be with my boyfriend 24/7. I met my friend that evening at around 9:30 at the bar. Wyatt said he would pick me up at around midnight. When I ordered a drink, the bartender looked at me and her eyes lit up, and not in a good way. She tentatively took my order and then brought my drink back, not even remotely making eye contact with me. It was as if though I offended her in some way, but I couldn't think of anything I could have done. I shrugged it off and continued to hang out with my friends. Periodically, I would look over to the bar and notice this bartender staring at me. It was a little jarring, but I wasn't about to let it ruin my night. When it was almost midnight, I closed out my tab and decided to use the restroom before Wyatt picked me up. While I was washing my hands, the bartender walked in and locked the door. I thought I was about to get jumped or something. She had tears in her eyes and she said, "Gina, you're Gina, right?" I nodded and responded with a very hesitant yes. The bartender lowered her head and said, Please tell me you're not dating him. If you are, you need to end it." Before letting her finish, I went right into defense mode. I figured she was jealous or some sort of ex-girlfriend or something along those lines. "Listen to me," she shouted. With nervousness and tension in her voice, she started to speak again. "I used to date Wyatt a couple of years ago. He would always compare me to you, say things like, 'Why can't you be more like Gina?' Or 'Gina would do it like this,' or my favorite, 'When I'm with Gina.' I grew to hate you. I didn't even know you. Then I found on his computer a folder that had hundreds, if not thousands of pictures of you. Those pictures of you were taken from all over the place. You driving, walking, pictures of you on dates, even pictures of you inside your house. I confronted Wyatt and he went nuts, deleted everything, threatened me and left town. I never saw him again until the other night when he walked into the bar. I knew you looked familiar to me, but I never put the pieces together until I saw Wyatt." My heart was racing at this point. I didn't know if I should believe her or if this was an exaggeration. I asked why she didn't contact the police, and she couldn't give me a straight answer. I started to feel like she may have just been a little jealous and I didn't believe her story. It just didn't seem like Wyatt. I thanked her for warning me and asked her to let me out of the bathroom. She unlocked the door and just stood there with her head down. At the time, I remember thinking to myself, if it is fake, this bartender is doing a great job looking scared. She was trembling and white as a ghost. A little after midnight, Wyatt pulled up and I got into his car. We started to drive back to his place and I felt comfortable enough with him to bring up the story that the bartender told me. After repeating the story to him, he was quiet for a second, like he was trying to find the words to say. Finally, instead of denying it, all he said was, "I just loved you so much, Gina." I looked back at Wyatt, who had his eyes on the road, and said, "Whoa, dude, are you telling me that story's true? You took all those photos of me?" He didn't respond with words. Instead, he just started to drive faster. I looked over and our speed was climbing. 75, 80, 85. And before I knew it, he was driving well over 100 miles per hour. I was frantic and screaming for him to stop the car. The stretch of highway we were on had a slight turn coming up, and when he hit the turn, he drove straight. And we went sailing right through the guardrail. The windshield shattered, and we rolled down a massive hill. I truly believe the reason I didn't die was because of that hill, as we eventually lost momentum as we continued to roll. I blacked out for a second, and when I came to, Wyatt was unconscious behind the wheel. I was bleeding from my head, but I was coherent, and I didn't feel like I had a concussion somehow. I grabbed my phone and called 911, who showed up extremely fast. They were able to treat my injuries, and as they pulled Wyatt out of the car, he finally started to come to. He was extremely groggy and taken to the hospital. I, however, told the police everything that happened that evening, how my boyfriend had purposely driven off the road going way over the speed limit. I did tell them about the pictures, but they didn't seem to do anything about it, at least I don't think they did. He was charged for the driving incident, and you better believe I pressed charges. I don't know if this guy intended on killing us both, or if he just truly went insane in that moment. I've known Wyatt for a long time, and I would never have any idea that he was capable of such horrors. I'm lucky to be alive, and I should have listened to the warning about him when the bartender told me. Thank God he's in jail, and I'm working with someone now to see what can be done about the alleged pictures he's taken of me. If that is true, that might be a serious crime to add on top of what else he did, and Wyatt might be locked up for his foreseeable future. One of the best things about your family owning a bar is that one day you get to inherit that bar. For many years, I assisted my father in running the bar. I bartended, worked in the kitchen, and helped with paperwork when I can. A couple of days ago, my old man unfortunately passed away, making me the sole owner of the business. One of the patrons, an older gentleman named Boris, was deeply saddened about the news of my father. The man was sobbing, which was an interesting sight for me. I've been working in this bar for over 20 years, and I've known Boris that entire time, and I'd never seen him get like this. Boris was a bigger man. He had a faint accent of some kind, but I'm not good with accents, so I have no idea where he's from. Over the years, I would consider Boris to be a friend. Other than my family, he's the longest relationship I've had. I know that Boris and my dad knew each other before he opened the bar, but I never got the story as to how they knew each other. For years, he would sit at the bar and talk to Boris. He was your typical dive bar regular. He rocked a full white beard and had solid white hair that was pulled back into a ponytail. He always wore brown, like he didn't own any other clothes of different colors. He always had some wild stories to tell, and they were always entertaining. So to see Boris so torn up really hit me hard. I gave him several drinks in the house in memory of my old man. That night when I closed the bar, Boris was still sitting there, in no condition to drive. I looked at the mentally wounded man and said, "All right, my friend, you're not driving tonight, I'll take you home." I knew where he lived because I've had to take him home countless times before. He lived 2 minutes away, and that's if he caught all the lights. I did all my cleaning and started to shut off the lights. "Come on, Boris, we're leaving," I shouted one last time, but he didn't budge. I sat down next to the man and put my arm around him to try and console him, and I still am shocked and slightly terrified about what happened. In a weak voice, Boris finally spoke up and said, "I'm not the man you think I am. When you get older like me, death makes you think." I just nodded and rubbed his shoulder a bit. I didn't know what to say. Boris then took his gigantic hand and slammed the counter of the bar. He looked at me in tears and said, "I've done things you wouldn't imagine. There were few ways to make a living where I came from. It was the only way I could escape, and I liked it. I liked what I did. I never knew I would feel like this, though. Never." Boris was drunk and clearly not in a stable mind. "Okay, buddy, let's just get you out of here. You sound like you need some rest," I said calmly as I stood up. Boris stood up swiftly, which was impressive for a man his age and under his current condition. The giant man made me look like a child next to him. He grabbed the collar of my shirt and started to jostle me around like a rag doll, and now screaming with pain in his voice, "You don't understand. I've done things. I'm not a good man. I still see the faces. Every night I see the faces." My heart was nearly beating out of my chest. He started to back me into a corner. I wasn't even processing his words at that moment. I was preoccupied with how I was going to neutralize the situation. Just as my back was fully against the wall, he turned around and sat back on one of the stools at the bar. He started to sob again. "You think you know me? Your father, he knew. He's gone now, just like everybody else." Boris started screaming and yelling. No words I understood, it clearly was some other language. He became even more irate, throwing the stools and flipping tables. My keys and phone were still behind the bar, and I sat like some coward in the corner while this giant man lost his poor mind. Finally, he turned to me one last time and said, "The faces won't haunt me anymore. I won't let them." Then he ran out of the bar, faster than anyone had ever seen move at that age. I just sat paralyzed on the ground for several minutes trying to process everything that had just happened. Once I finally calmed down, I got up to chase after him, but when I ran outside, he was completely out of sight. I grabbed my keys and started to drive up and down the road, and he was nowhere to be found. I couldn't imagine a man his age could have gotten very far, but the roads were empty. I drove to his house and knocked on the door, but no answer. At this time, I finally called the police and reported everything to them that I just laid out here. And Boris never went home that evening, and believe it or not, he's still missing. No trace of his body or him anywhere. His car is at his house, and he's not there. And he has no family that the police or I could identify, and nothing in his home indicated where he could have gone. And as of writing this, he's still out there somewhere, and honestly, I just hope he's okay. I have talked to that man millions of times, someone I have told countless personal stories to, someone I genuinely care about, had completely snapped. Something he had buried deep down with him finally escaped, and whatever memories he had became too much for him to sustain. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, if you touch my Funko Pop, you die.
There's a stack of 2 full-sized Pringle cans on my desk, and I don't know what to do with it, but part of me wants to stack more until it reaches the ceiling. Oh hey, just thinking over here. By the way, I've got some new, scary, and allegedly true stories about camping for you today. I hope you like them. Remember to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. I'm looking for Black Forest stories and any sort of terrifying encounter with the unexplained. Be sure to search for and check out Tales from the Break Room, my new podcast about the scariest and truest work stories ever. Available on Spotify, Apple, and most of your favorite podcast apps. Now, let's begin. Thing in the Woods. From Bat. I don't think you should necessarily be afraid of the dark, but you should definitely be aware of your surroundings when nighttime comes, or you might just encounter something very unpleasant. Despite all the bad things going on in the world, my mom and I decided it would be a good idea to go on a camping trip in northern Ontario, Canada. When she told me about this campsite, I just couldn't say no. I love the outdoors. We invited our friend too, let's call her Phoenix. She was more than enthusiastic to tag along. On July 7th, we set off. It was a long, tiring trip, but the landscapes were breathtaking nonetheless. After driving 5.5 hours, we made it. I was so happy just to be out of the car. The first few days were great. We had a lot of fun fishing, swimming, and hiking the trails. The weather was good too. It was like a dream come true. Though after a while, we began to hear strange noises at night, usually while we were in our tent. My mother and Phoenix just brushed it off as an animal in the woods. But I felt uneasy. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded human, but there was no logical reason for someone to be in the woods past midnight, right? I should mention that we were in a pretty remote area. We only had one neighbor beside us the whole time. They were on the right side and the noises were coming from the left. A few times by the campfire, we would hear the same noises, like feet scattering around in the woods. When I flashed my flashlight towards the noises, I wouldn't see anything, nothing peculiar. The second last night, me, my mom, and Phoenix put out the fire and turned in for the night. I had done a lot that day, so I had no trouble falling asleep. The night was peaceful, until I woke up to someone walking around outside. At first, I thought it was one of my campmates, but when I looked over, I saw them both fast asleep. I shifted around a bit, and when I did, they must have heard me and gotten scared off, because the footsteps turned into a run. They faded away into the woods. I was too freaked out to even say anything, so I just lay there in silence. I couldn't hear that person anymore. I found myself falling back asleep, which was a dumb idea, as there could have been a murderer out there. I then woke up a second time to the same noise, but this time it was closer. I nudged my mom gently and pointed towards the sound, staying as silent as possible. She mumbled something about a raccoon and fell back to sleep. The noise then stopped. I shut my eyes and hid under my covers. After a few moments of complete silence, a hand grabbed my leg. I screamed louder than I've ever screamed before, waking up both my mom and Phoenix. I kicked as hard as I could. I must have hit it because I heard a loud grunt, very loud and very animalistic. At first, it just stood there. I could see it, illuminated by the moonlight. I saw hooves and antlers like a deer, but it was standing on two legs, and the thing that grabbed me had been a hand. It was so tall and thin. Thank God it ran away again, because I was sure then that I was going to die. We packed up everything except the tent and sped out of there, despite it being the middle of the night. My mom dialed 911, telling them what happened. They had police officers go out there, checking the area. One officer even followed behind us until we left the park, to make sure we were safe. However, they found nothing of interest. I didn't sleep for the remainder of the night. I was too scared, even back at my own home. I'm just glad we got out of there alive, even if we were terrified. I always keep my guard up nowadays, and I'm never going back to that place. Not after that night. To be honest, I haven't even gone camping at all since then. Always be mindful of the things around you, and be careful of what could be lurking in the dark. The Glowing Eyes, from Nina Bug, 1998. This story has stuck with me for a long time. It takes place when I was on a family camping trip. I don't remember where we were exactly. It was some spot Sarah, my mother, heard about from a friend. It wasn't a place we'd been before, but the friend, Ginny, told Sarah about it and offered us their RV to go spend a few nights there to see if we liked it. Now, something you need to know about Ginny. She was weird. Like, sits there petting a crow while sitting on the couch and having a beer while talking to people, and I'm talking about an actual crow that was mounted. Also, she was a friend of one of Sarah's co-workers at the time. So, all in all, we really didn't know her that well. But said co-worker was a very good person and trusted by me and my parents. So I guess Sarah thought that's why we should visit Ginny in the first place. My family loved camping, and I still do, but due to living situations, I haven't in a long time. Back to the story. This camping spot was way out of the way, like Ginny had to draw a map for us to find it. It was an actual campground, but I don't remember the name anymore. It was kinda run down and gave me a weird vibe, like that feeling you get when something is off, but you have no clue what it is. Well, I was young, and I figured I just had that feeling because I'd never been there before. Now, we weren't the only people there. It wasn't like we were alone. In the area we picked to put the RV, I could see maybe 4 or 5 other spots that were being used. Now, this RV was like your basic RV in 2008. Big bed in the back, and a bunk over the driver's area. There was the couch too. That's where all the sleeping spots were. Now, I did like to climb. I was like a little monkey. So I took the bunk over the driving area. It also had a big window in the front for me to look out of. I could close this little curtain, but it was pretty see-through. Like if it were daylight, I could see people through it, but not clearly at all. Basically just outlines of things. We parked the RV in this spot next to the river. We used to do a lot of fishing, so I thought that would be great. I wouldn't have to carry all my fishing stuff very far. I jumped at the chance to go fishing right away. We set everything up with the RV and I was heading for the river. It was like maybe 20-ish feet from our campsite. I set up my seat and got my pole all ready, baiting the hook and all that. In doing so, I pricked my finger a lot because the darn worm was so wiggly. Then again, all worms are. So I got my hook baited, cast it out, and sat down to wait. I waited until my butt got sore, doing the usual reeling in to check to make sure there was still bait and rebaiting when needed. You know how fishing is. During all this, I noticed a few others fishing further down. We weren't close, but not that far. I decided to be friendly and called out, "Catching anything?" A boy about my age at the time was the one that called back.
Got a catfish about an hour ago, but nothing since.
I told him,
Well, something keeps stealing my bait.
He asked,
What bait are you using?
Just some worms. You?
Chicken liver.
So we had this long-distance talk about fishing. Just because I do a little fishing does not mean I can tell you what fish it was. A bass, a catfish, a bluegill, those I can tell, but I cannot tell you if you're holding a trout or not. This boy, I'll call him Leo, was real nice about it, and showed me a little pamphlet of fish he had with him. We sat together for hours after that, talking and fishing. Leo was a really nice guy, and I wish I was still in contact with him. Anyway, Leo and his family were only 2 spots away from mine, and also along the river. The day was pretty normal after that. Once I gave up on fishing for the day, Leo asked if I wanted to come hike with him. By that point in my life, I had a cell phone, so when I asked my parents if it was okay to go on a hike with my new friend, they said yes. I packed up a bag with water bottles and a lunch, and I met up with Leo. Together, we walked to the trailhead. He told me it was his first time being at this campground too, but his uncle, who he was with, came here all the time. So, of course, I had to ask about what his uncle thought of the place.
Oh, Uncle says he loves coming here, but he gets good proof.
Proof? That had me interested. Proof of what?
Bigfoot, he says, but I don't think that's what it really is.
I frowned. Do you not believe in Bigfoot?
Oh, it's not like that,
Leo assured me. I just think he's using the wrong name for it. Now I was invested. I adjusted my bag, then asked Leo, what makes you think that? Have you seen it?
Well, no, I haven't seen it myself, but my uncle tells me about it.
Leo explained.
He says it's really tall and hairy, that it has big feet and makes these weird sounds, and it has a bad smell when it's close by.
So far to me that sounded like Bigfoot, but I wanted to know more before just saying that's what I thought it was. I asked him what else his uncle says about it. That's when I was thrown for a loop. Leo told me his uncle said this thing had a tail and would howl on full moons. Now to me, howling at a full moon makes me think werewolf. Of course, I don't think we have those in Iowa. I could be wrong though. The more Leo told me, the more it made me think, this sounded like a mix of things. Wolf and Bigfoot. Was that a possibility? Was he talking about a wolfman? Keep in mind I'm young at this time. I'm into learning about cryptids and folklore monsters. So I was excited about this during the day. Because when the sun is out, that stuff doesn't scare you. At least, not as much. Well, it started to scare me when we stopped to eat our lunches, and we saw just how deep we walked into those woods. We couldn't even hear the river anymore. I told Leo we should head back after we eat, and he agreed. We sat and ate, talking about hobbies and things like, how many times have you done such and such? And just things kids talk about. About halfway through eating, Leo asked me, did you hear that? I hadn't heard anything, so I shook my head. No, what did you hear? Leo listened closely but shook his head. Never mind. Probably just a deer or something. Now my hyperactive imagination instantly thought, oh heck no, that wasn't a deer. But I didn't say that. I just nodded. Besides, I hadn't heard the sound, so I couldn't say it wasn't a deer or some other animal, a normal animal. Let's just say we finished eating pretty quick and headed back. On the way back, we didn't say anything. I think both of us were trying to see if we could hear something. I'm not proud to admit it, but I did start to jog when we heard something moving behind us. You hear that? Yeah, that sounded big. Do you think someone else is out here hiking? Sure. I think we were trying to keep each other from freaking out. When we got back, we just kinda chuckled at how silly we were. What were the odds the Bigfoot, as his uncle called it, was out there watching the two of us eat lunch? That stuff happens in scary movies, not real life. Of course, when these things happen to you, you tell yourself that can't happen to you, that it only happens in movies. Well, there I was telling myself just that. I get spooked easy sometimes. We headed to our campsites. I thought about telling my parents what Leo told me about why his uncle comes to the campground, but I knew they would probably just laugh. So I kept it to myself. After I got back, David wanted to go fishing, so I spent the rest of the day fishing and then helping make dinner. Overall, my first day wasn't that bad. It was the nighttime I should have worried about. After making s'mores and cleaning up a bit, I got a shower in. And by the way, why the flipping flop do RV bathrooms have to be so darn small? I may be short, but I'm round, and that shower barely fit me. Anyway, when I was done, I climbed up in my bed and closed the little curtain thing. I got all comfortable, but I've always had a hard time falling asleep. I was on my side at the time, just looking out the window. I had my music playing, listening with my headphones so my parents didn't yell at me. I was basically waiting for sleep to take me. After a while, I'm not sure how long, I got a weird feeling. Don't ask me why, but I pulled off my headphones before peeking out the curtain. It wasn't a full moon, but was pretty darn close. So there was a fair amount of light. I saw what I thought were fireflies at first. Then I noticed they were way too big and staying too still. And they were kinda too high, but I've seen them get high, so that part wasn't so bad. I watched them for a moment. They just sat there for a while. I was leaning on my elbow for so long it got sore. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was all worked up because of what Leo said. It happened all the time when I heard creepy or scary stories and stuff like that. So I told myself that's what was happening, and I rolled over. I did fall asleep at some point. I told Leo the next morning, "I think you got me freaked out yesterday with telling me about your uncle's Bigfoot." Leo was a little bit confused. "Why? Did you have a dream about it?" I shook my head. "No, but I swear I saw eyes in the trees last night. Pretty silly, huh?" Leo looked at me. "What color were they?" That caught me off guard. "What? What color were they?" I just shrugged. "I don't know, like when you shine the light in an animal's eyes at night, I guess." "Dude, you had me worked up. It was probably just my brain playing tricks or a raccoon." I think I was trying to make myself feel better at this point. Leo replied, "Don't go out at night and stay close to your campsite." Well, that both confused and scared me. Why? "My uncle says so. He says if you see the eyes, you should not go out at night." I was even more freaked out. I didn't know what to do. I just told Leo he shouldn't scare me, because I'd be freaked out for weeks because of it. Then he said, "Then let's talk about something else." I was more than happy to change the subject. We began talking about things like our pets and we went to fish. Well, he fished and I sat with him and talked. I spent most of the day with Leo when I was there, but at night I was a wreck. I would check out from the curtain at night, seeing eyes in the trees. Finally, I told Leo to come with me and went to check where I would see the eyes at night. We walked into the weeds and trees. At first we saw nothing, but then we saw where the grass and weeds had been stomped down like someone was standing there. And there were deep scratch marks on the tree, like when you put your hand against something when you lean on it. I mean, why would something just claw a tree like that for seemingly no reason? I looked at Leo. "What's this?" I pointed at those scratches. Leo shook his head. I got uneasy and decided to get back to my campsite. We spent the day in camp. We didn't even go to the river. I don't know why. I just felt like I should be close to the RV in case I had to run. I'm not a fast runner, and I sprint, not run. That last day there was just spent shifting around and glancing at the trees while trying to talk about something else. My family left the next day, but that last night will stick with me forever. I checked for the eyes again that night, which I had started doing every night for the past few nights. This time I didn't see any eyes. Was it gone? I'd seen them every night until then, so I thought I was safe. I went to close the curtain, but I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Keep in mind, I was already jumpy. I looked and saw something huge near the river. It was covered in what appeared to be fur, and I saw a tail. I got real scared then. So, as any smart child would do, I closed the curtain and pulled the blanket over my head. I didn't sleep at all that night. I heard something outside a few times, but I stayed under the blanket. I was too scared to look. What if it saw me? What would it do? What even was it? When I got out of bed the next morning, I didn't even get dressed. I walked out in my pajamas, which was a big shirt that covered my shorts. I looked around and saw prints. These prints looked like a mix of people's feet and a paw. I knew then it was not my imagination that night. We packed up our camp and I told Leo goodbye. We never went back. My family preferred our usual campground to that one, but I still wonder what that could have been. And what did it want? Was there more than one of them out there? Or was there only one? Maybe it was a family unit. It didn't do damage to anything physically, except that tree, of course. Paralyzed with Fear. From Rachel White, 20002. I'm 16 years old, and all my life I've never had sleep paralysis, though my mom and her mom had before. I always thought maybe I would be lucky and it wouldn't happen to me. Well, not too long ago, my grandma wanted to go camping with me, my sister, and my aunt. We planned on leaving Thursday and would be coming home on Sunday. I was honestly really excited. I hadn't been camping since the year before, and I was up for what sounded like a fun 3-day weekend. We went camping in this secluded forest. The rangers had previously warned us about bears and wolves, since my aunt and I had brought our dogs. We set up our tent, and by then it was already dark. I was tired and cold. It was a chilly 39 degrees that night. We had some dinner and everything seemed fine, but once in a while I would feel like something was watching me. I shook it off, ignoring it, thinking I was just letting my sister's stories scare me. I must have woke up around midnight, close to 1 in the morning, to the sound of crunching leaves outside our tent. I was trying to tell myself it was nothing to worry about, trying to go back to sleep. But I had this sudden urge to roll off my air mattress and onto the floor, where my sister was asleep. I was rolled up in my sleeping bag, and all I could see was the darkness of the inside of my blankets. After a while, though, the sound came back, and this time, it seemed to have stopped right by my head. My breathing began to falter. I had no clue who or what this was, or what they wanted. I tried to steady my breathing, trying to pretend I was sleeping. All of a sudden, after my sister's soft snoring, I heard a growl. It was low and seemed like a warning. At first, I thought it was a bear. Perhaps we had upset it. This suspenseful scenario went on for about 5 minutes, and by then I was having enough of it. But that was when I realized I couldn't even move. I could not will any of my body to move except my foot. My aunt's bed was right where my foot was moving. I tried nudging her bed, but I forgot she was a deep sleeper like my sister. I nudged her bed over and over again, hoping she would wake up. After a few seconds, I finally regained my voice. "Sharon, I think something's outside growling," I called out, hoping she would hear me. After a few seconds of me trying to get her to wake up, my grandma woke up on the other side of the tent. She was already up because of her Charlie horse in her leg. She stood from her cot, and I was already standing up by that point, shaking and crying. My grandma shined her flashlight in my face. She then said to me, "You look pale as a ghost." She then insisted I should move my air mattress to her room and just stay there for the rest of the night. By now, my sister was awake because of my commotion. After lying down, I explained to my grandma what happened. She then said that we should pray. So we did. After that, I felt so much better. But the rest of the night, I was on edge and shaking horribly. The next morning after I got up, I checked outside where my head was, and I never did find any tracks of any kind. It was like it all happened in my head, or at least I hoped it did. I have no clue what happened to me that night, but I'm still on high alert, and I'm afraid to sleep at night sometimes. It seems like I hardly get enough sleep, and I still think I was visited by something supernatural, like a hellhound. Thank you for listening to my story. The Monsters of Bear Creek, from John M.K. I have divorced parents, and my life, since I was just a year old, was always back and forth. One visit to my mom's house was particularly scary to me, not because she abused me or anything, but because of the creature that I encountered during our trip. I was about 12 then, and we were going camping down to Bear Creek. I was already scared of bears. I had zero knowledge of survival, or how to determine what type of bear I was looking at if I did see one, so I was pretty nervous. There was a camping spot right next to a lake about a mile from Bear Creek. It was the perfect spot to camp. Good sightseeing, perfect fishing spot, and most importantly, peace and quiet. Now, forests aren't always quiet. There are bugs, birds, and sometimes animal calls. But after 2 or 3 hours of being there, I got used to the constant noises. I liked it, in a way. Eventually, it was time for bed, so we all helped out cleaning up, putting away the marshmallows, putting out the fire, and picking up the trash. After that, we all went into the camper, got our sleeping bags, and went to sleep. At about 3:17 in the morning, I know because I remember looking at my watch, there came a loud rustling noise near my bed from outside. It was like someone or something was dragging something. I slept in the pop-out bed, so you could probably hear everything from outside. I felt a sort of fear mixed in with curiosity, and I went to check it out. I thought it was a bear or an elk, something that would be worth finding. I peeked through the kitchen window, and I almost passed out. There was what looked to be an elk, but it had been torn to shreds, organs, bones, and muscle pieces everywhere. Then there was this enormous creature, practically bouncing around the elk's corpse. It had snow-white skin, long arms and fingers, short legs, and worst of all, its face, which was absolutely disgusting. It had yellow eyes with these pupils that were so big I almost couldn't see the yellow parts unless it moved its eyes. It had no nose, but it did look like it had a nose before at some point. And its mouth was like looking into a bad dream. It was covered in blood, its lips stretching ear to ear, not a smile. And lastly, its teeth were almost like 3-inch knives. They were so large, the creature couldn't close its lips around it. They were only half covered. I just stood there looking at this thing, my heart pounding. If I could describe it as a 12-year-old, it would resemble SCP-096 in the scariest way possible. I realized that it was feasting on this elk, bouncing to a different area of the carcass every couple of seconds. It was circling it, slowly but surely devouring it all. Every time it moved its head, I could see its jaw open so wide, almost a full 90 degrees, and as the jaw lurched forward to take another bite, it shrieked. Its cry was a mix between an eagle and a human screaming. It was something terrible. The shriek made me want to just wake up from this horrid dream. But I realized this was no dream, no nightmare. After about 5 minutes of my heart pounding, its bouncing rotation of its feast led it to the elk's head. But before it took another bite, it looked suddenly in my direction. I made direct eye contact with it. I felt this overwhelming feeling of dread and fear. I couldn't break eye contact with it. I realized something else then. It wasn't angry or aggressive. It didn't want to attack me or attempt to. Instead, it seemed to be happy. It seemed gleeful about its feast and that it wasn't alone for dinner. I took a deep breath. Something came over me, compelling me to go outside. And before I knew it, I was walking outside the camper. The creature jumped back a little at my presence when I opened the door, but then it became curious of me and slowly walked over. I stood my ground, although this thing could easily destroy a moose. I looked at its eyes again. The creature looked so deadly and violent, and yet behaved so docile. That's what I thought, at least. Within 2 seconds of me thinking that I was going to be safe, it opened its mouth and screamed right in my ear. I should have stayed in the camper. I closed my eyes, accepting what was about to happen. Then I heard a gunshot. Something heavy fell to the ground. I opened my eyes. That creature lay dead before me on the pine-needled floor, a bullet hole through its head. I turned and I saw a hunter in the woods, a man who had just seen me nearly die. The hunter walked over to me, kneeling down to my level. He had a look of exhaustion and stress on his face. He told me that I had almost become food, and that wasn't the only one out here. He then dragged the thing away, and I didn't get a chance to ask him what it was. A few hours later, everyone else was awake. I tried to tell them what happened, but they didn't believe me, probably thinking I had a nightmare. But I have a feeling that I scared them pretty well anyway. Beware the monsters of Bear Creek. Although they might make you think you're safe, you never are. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.